Hi there, and welcome to Next Frontier. My name is Thomas Andersen, founder and CEO of Responsibly, and Next Frontier is my show about sustainability in the supply chain. Today, I'm talking to Fabian Diaz. Fabian is an expert on life cycle analysis, LCA, and environmental product declarations, EPDs. He's consulting companies on it, currently at Climate Earth, and he studied it during his PhD. So Fabian really knows what he's talking about. We actually met on LinkedIn in a discussion on using LCA in procurement decisions, and we didn't agree. Fabian is a scientist and rightly so was pushing an accuracy perspective and the importance of nuances when calculating emissions. That conflicted a little bit with my pragmatism and experience with how difficult it can be to just get this and manage it with your suppliers. So I invited him to Next Frontier to discuss it in detail, and it resulted in a really interesting conversation. We go deep on product level emissions data, life cycle analyses, and environmental declarations, and I promise you it's a lot more interesting than it sounds. So we discuss very pragmatically how to use this in a procurement and supply chain context. Okay, Fabian Diaz, LCA and EPD project manager at Climate Earth. Here we go. Hey Fabian.
Hello Thomas. How are you?
Good to see you. I'm very good, thank you. How are you doing?
Good. Everything is going great. I was checking earlier your recently your last episode of your podcast.
Oh yeah, what did you
Yeah.
think of it?
No, it was very. I managed to watch like 20 minutes
Mm-hmm.
during lunch. I think it was very insightful on what are the main challenges for designing sustainable products. Right.
Yeah,
Very
and
cool.
it's relevant for our conversation today, right?
Yeah,
Because
I
yeah,
think
we're
so.
also going to be on the product level, so definitely some parallels to be drawing there. One thing is designing it, another thing is evaluating it, but they go hand
Hmm.
in hand.
Yeah, of course.
And how has your day been, Fabian? Is it Copenhagen? It's beautiful today. Is it the same where you are?
Same. It's beautiful. It's sunny, a little bit cloudy though, but it's great. It's great. Anyways,
Awesome.
I work from home, so I always take a short walk for going for lunch or to run some errands. In days like this, is the right moment to run those errands.
That's a
In
great idea.
winter,
I
yeah,
think it's
in
so
winter not so
important.
much.
We switched office recently, and in the new office, it's a better office, but in the old one, we had like some outdoor space where I would typically go out in the morning when it was sunny and just start working from outside in the fresh air. I don't have that here, so I haven't found that perfect combination where I can just sit in the sun for a few hours and work. But that's
Okay.
for me, that's life quality when you can spend time outside like that. When we have
Yeah.
desk jobs like we do.
Yeah, we are very lucky.
Exactly. But Fabian, it's great to see you, and welcome to Next Frontier.
Thank you, Thomas, for the invitation. It is a pleasure, really.
It really is, and I'm really excited about today because we met each other through LinkedIn, Fabian. So we actually don't know each other that well, and I'm really looking forward to exploring your background together. So there's going to be a lot of things that I hear for the first time today, which is really exciting. And our whole starting point, I guess, was some back and forth discussions on LinkedIn over product level emissions data and life cycle analysis and LCAs. And I
Yeah.
just think that's a really, really interesting discussion, both because it's all the rave these days. Everybody's talking about LCA and product level emissions.
Hmm.
At least if you're into the subject, right? We might sound super nerdy now to somebody who's not into that subject. But it's getting a lot of attention these days, and you have a really nuanced perspective on it because you've been working specifically with LCA for a long time. And on kind of my end, I'm more high level, right? I'm spending all of my time thinking about supply chain and sustainability as a whole, how to pragmatically attack that. And of course, that includes LCA, but to no extent at the level that you're working on it. So I'm just really looking forward to exploring that, conversation together. And that means, the theme for today, it's all about sustainability on the product level. It's all about life cycle assessments and how to use this data to optimize your supply chain for sustainability and make purchasing decisions.
Yeah,
Um,
I was
but
I was
yeah,
gonna go there, Thomas, because we met each other discussing our different point of views on certain matters regarding life cycle assessment and greenhouse gas
exactly.
data, and it was very insightful to have those discussions with you. I guess those different views come from the different uh, places where we have been working at. And I think that's why it's valuable to always engage with the other professionals in the community, working from different perspectives. I think that has allowed me, at least to me, to learn a lot. And I appreciate a lot what LinkedIn brings to
Hmm.
professionals. I have met so many people and so many good and smart people that I have learned a lot from others. Yeah, so
100%.
just a note on that.
No, I agree. And I think LinkedIn can get a little bit of a bad rep sometimes because it's being used in funny ways,
I know.
There's a lot of bad stuff on there, to be honest. I
Hmm.
saw, you probably saw it as well, but there was a post that circulated the previous days about somebody using his marriage proposal to his fiance or girlfriend, like a picture of that, and then saying this is how it corresponds to sales.
No way. Okay, some people has their own approach to how to use LinkedIn a bit, but it's funny.
Exactly. But I agree with you. There's so much, especially in a field like sustainability, where
Mhm.
it's evolving. It's a good forum for having discussions, I think, across companies and getting different viewpoints. So I really enjoy that as well.
Mhm. Yeah.
Awesome. But
Okay.
Fabian, before we dive into the real
Mhm.
nerdy stuff, I want to start a little bit from the beginning because you've been working with sustainability at several companies now. You have a PhD in environmental science. But as I can see, you started your career as an engineer, right? So I'd
Yeah.
love to know, that journey. How did you get into to sustainability?
I got into sustainability in the hard way. I am a
Okay.
chemical engineer by training.
Hmm.
I'm from Colombia, so I did my bachelor there. And in Colombia, in Latin America, and also a little bit in the United States, I work in the oil and gas sector. I was
Okay.
an engineer drilling wells for oil and gas. That's how I used to make my living.
Hmm.
And I worked on that for almost 8 years. And the reason why I came to Europe and I also changed my whole career is because that job was not sustainable for me. So my
Hmm.
main reason to come to this side, to the light side, was because I figured out that that job was not so, let's say, economically was not sustainable, because when you
Hmm.
are working, especially in upstream operations, you are very exposed to oil prices variability. When the oil prices go down, a lot of companies lay off many people.
Mm.
I never really suffered a lot from that, but it was a heavy toll, mental toll, to have that always in the back of your head, like, oh, checking the oil price, because if the oil goes below certain value, you know that next day you are gonna be probably fired from the company you're working on. So,
Wow.
and also because socially, emotionally, was not also so beneficial for me. So I decided to do a master in environmental science. I came to Latvia. I did my master in environmental science. I was a little bit nerdy, so the university offered me a position as researcher
Mhm.
and the scholarship for doing the PhD. And I work as a researcher doing life cycle assessment, life cycle sustainability evaluation for European sponsored projects for almost 4 years.
Mhm.
Uh, After those 4 years, I realized I wanted to go back to the industry to do a little more of on the ground application of LCA.
Mhm.
And I work with a chemical company as LCA manager.
Mhm.
And for the last 6 months, I have been working uh, with a company that does environmental product declaration, which is a type 3 environmental claim, let's say.
Okay.
Yeah, based on, of course, life cycle assessment.
That's
And
amazing.
that's in a nutshell my uh, my kind of path towards sustainability and life cycle assessment.
That's great, Fabian. It's quite funny. We haven't had this podcast for a long time, but you're already the second person I talked to who made the shift from oil and gas into sustainability. So,
Yeah.
you can say a lot of things about oil and gas, but at least it's producing a lot of climate conscious professionals that want to make a difference.
Some of us, by different reasons, we start realizing eventually that there are a lot of things that can be improved. I'm not saying that we should stop oil and gas tomorrow, because we are still reliable on that,
Mhm.
but we should, based on scientific evidence, start to move away from them as fast as we can, as fast as possible. Yeah.
100%. And you moved, so you grew up in Colombia and then you moved to
Yeah.
Europe. How
Mhm.
did that happen? Was that like you just wanted to try something new and so on, or
Yeah.
did something else lead you here?
Yeah, two things. I wanted a personal change. I wanted to see a completely different culture.
Hmm.
That's one of the main reasons why I didn't go to study to Spain. Most people in South America, when they think about going abroad for a study, they go to Spain because of the language. I wanted to see something completely different. But I
Ah.
was also, I was kind of aware of life cycle assessment. I was looking for a program that was very practical,
Hmm.
and the one here in Riga Technical University, where I did the master and PhD, was kind of meeting those checks. And I thought, okay, what can be more different to Colombia than Latvia, right?
That's true. And
Yeah.
how does because we obviously work with a lot of companies that are headquartered in the EU because there's a lot
Mhm.
of urgency due to compliance there. How have you found European maturity, awareness about sustainability versus Colombian?
I think when it comes to sustainability, when it comes to reporting, Europe is ahead of any other continent, really.
Mhm.
Mm, you look at the news and you realize how much pushback there is in the same type of policies that Europe or the European Commission and European Parliament is moving forward. There is a lot of pushback in the United States,
Mhm.
and when I compare to Colombia, those things are just barely being discussed there, or they are being discussed, but at a very starting level. So honestly, I believe that Europe is the leading when it comes to sustainability, when it comes to eco design,
Mhm.
to corporate greenhouse gas calculation, product level sustainability, and reporting. So it's a good place to be if we are working on sustainability. My hope is that eventually this vision goes into some other places in the world, because I really believe this is the way to go. I actually think that we should be doing this even faster than we are, but
Yeah, I
it is
think
what
I
it
think
is.
every sustainability professional will be super impatient on this topic, right?
Yeah.
And because we kind of have to be because it's not going fast enough. But
Hmm.
that makes sense. Awesome,
Yeah.
Fabian. Let's dive all the way into LCA. Can you help the listener who's maybe a little bit unfamiliar with the topic understand what is LCA in the first place?
Hmm. Yeah. Life cycle assessment is, in a nutshell, a methodology, a procedure to evaluate the environmental impact of a product, or
Hmm.
a process, or a system, or even a service. You can do LCA for a service. Yeah? You identify and quantify things like energy consumption, materials put into that system, wherever it is, the wastes that are generated in making that product, in delivering that service. And through some calculations, you can showcase what is the environmental impact of that system under study. By environmental impact, I mean, for example, carbon footprint, water footprint, impact on human health, impact on ecosystems. There are different type of either environmental impact categories, or also at a higher level, what we know in LCA as damage categories or
Hmm.
areas of concern. Yeah, but in a nutshell, it's no more than that: a methodology to calculate those things that we, of course, we need to start to pay more and more attention, because you cannot improve what you have not measured, right? So
Hmm.
I always say LCA is the starting point on your sustainability endeavors.
Awesome. And how does that, if let's say you are a company, you've calculated your scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions, that might
Mhm.
be more familiar, at least to some companies. How does that differ and interact with something like an LCA calculation, which is then, of course,
Mhm.
for a specific product you're selling? Does it
Yeah.
overlap? And how
Mhm.
so?
They do not necessarily overlap. I
Okay.
mean, at the end, the same things that, and you are totally right. Companies are more familiar with the scope one, scope two, and scope three concepts
Hmm.
and way to see the things. But at the end, LCA, especially when we are talking about cradle to grave LCA, we
Hmm.
cover in LCA the same activities or categories, just in
Hmm.
a different way. We don't call them scope one and two and three. We call them raw materials acquisition, transport of raw materials, manufacturing, transport of your product, use stage, and end of life. Yeah.
Hmm.
Depending on the LCA framework, because there are different framework standards, they receive a different name. But in general, we could say that they are the same in terms of system boundaries. It's just a matter of how you call them, and of course how you present the results
Hmm.
in the final report or in the communication disclosure from the company. But you cover basically, or you can cover, you have the possibility to cover exactly the same activities or categories that
Yeah.
companies are used to. Yeah.
Would it be fair to say that, if everything is done correctly, which it never will be because it's a difficult world, but would the sum of all of your products, LCA footprint, would that be the same as your scope 1, 2, and 3? Like theoretically?
Not really,
Okay.
because in LCA, especially when we are talking about LCA for products,
Hmm.
there are certain, I said before that in general all categories are covered, but there are certain things that we do not consider in LCAs. For
Okay.
example, if we are talking about product LCA, I will not be paying attention to things like staff commuting, something
Hmm.
that is covered in the scope 3 category, right?
Got it.
In greenhouse gases, at least according to the GSG protocol. If we are talking about the product level, we do not consider that the staff
Hmm.
travel. Why? Because the product is done in the manufacturing plant, and people making business here and there, those emissions are not charged or should not be charged to the product. They should be charged to the company. We all agree on that, but not
Hmm.
on the product. Yeah.
Okay. But I
Hmm.
guess to some extent you are, and maybe I'm wrong here, but I guess to some extent you are taking, let's say, electricity consumption in a factory where they're producing 10 products, and ideally you would then be allocating some of those emissions to the 10 products that are being produced in LCA, right?
Yeah, that is called allocation. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. But
Depending. Mhm.
but there's like a distinction between, let's say, the factory that helps produce the product and is part of that life cycle, and then I guess the overhead of a company like a headquarter somewhere that might have separate emissions. Those are not being allocated to the products.
Exactly. If we are talking about LCA, in most cases, we do not allocate those emissions related to headquarters or to offices, heating
Mhm.
for offices, electricity consumed in the office, the water that the staff drinks, all those things. We usually do not charge them in a product LCA. Yeah.
Got
But
it.
it's important to notice that you can do an LCA also for corporations, and then you can include all those things. What will change is the way you present the results. If we
Mhm.
if we are talking about LCA, traditional LCA, maybe we will not present those results in terms of scope one, two, and three, although we could do it. Yeah, but it will be more in this kind of more streamlined way of, again, raw material acquisition, transport, manufacturing, distribution, etc.
Got it. Interesting. Would that then, if you do an LCA for a company, would that then in principle amount to the same as a scope 1, 2, and 3 calculation for that company? Or are there still like major categories that wouldn't be included?
The thing with LCA is that LCA, as defined at least in the ISO 14040 and
Mhm.
ISO 14044, which are the main standards for life cycle assessment, the thing with LCA is that it's very flexible. They
Mhm.
do not tell you you must include this and you must not include that. So at the end is what the company wants. Yeah. It is a little bit different if we are talking about environmental product declarations or product carbon footprint under the ISO 14067, because then there are, in those standards or guidelines, they are telling you directly include this and exclude that. Yeah?
Mhm.
But if we are talking in general about LCA, it's very flexible. We can cut off activities, we can cut off stages in the life cycle. This is the, for example, very common LCA cradle to gate, where you
Mhm.
usually take into account your materials and your manufacturing, and then you stop there because for some reason, whatever it is, you don't want to include in your study the use of the product or the end of life. So
Yeah.
LCA is very flexible, and I think that is also it goes it's a pro and a con at the same time, because that flexibility allows the company to do whatever they want, but also it somehow in many cases it becomes an obstacle for comparability, because when
Mhm.
you have that flexibility, some companies are evaluating or including in their study transport of staff. Again, if to keep the same example, a company might be including the transport of the staff and
Mhm.
another company not, and then you cannot compare the results, because of course the impact most likely will be higher if you are including more and more activities. So
Mhm.
it's a pro and a con at the same time.
Got it.
Hmm.
That's super interesting. And of course, the reason I'm asking is, and we'll go a little bit back to LCA because there's so many more questions I have, but ultimately I'm thinking about this from a decision making perspective, right? In the supply chain. And I guess the same applies in both LCA and scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. If you're making purchasing decisions, not all of the data might be relevant for you. So, like in scope 1, 2, and 3 decisions, there's especially the downstream scope 3 emissions, which is, product end of use as well,
Hmm.
and those kind of things. And a lot of companies don't want to use that in their evaluations because then they're almost double counting. Then they're starting to count themselves into the picture, right?
Yeah.
And I guess it's the same with LCA. Like end of use, you may or may not want to include in your decision making,
Hmm.
depending on what it is. I think there's some end of use programs that will be quite interesting for procurement to know about, that they exist after they've used the product. But largely, you care more about your manufacturing, the transportation, the ingredients, and upstream supply chain behind it.
Yeah, that is totally true, and this is why I believe that if we are gonna use LCA data in the supply chain, we
Hmm.
should come to an agreement by the use of certain standards.
Hmm.
And this is why I like so much what I do for a living, which is environmental product declaration, because at the end, an EPD, an environmental product declaration, what it does is it has a specific product category rules
Hmm.
that you must follow. And depending on the product and at the type of product, you know what you need to include, it is mandatory to include, and what is not. So it
Hmm.
makes it easier for comparability. Someone in the supply chain can take EPDs from different companies, and let's say there are a lot of nuances here, but in theory, they should be able or they could compare the environmental impact of different products from different suppliers and
Hmm.
include carbon accounting or water footprint accounting into the decision making, because the EPD ensures that at least there is certain level of comparability, especially
Yeah.
if the EPDs belong to the same program operator.
Okay, that's interesting. Let's double click on that,
Hmm.
because that seems to be one of the topics that people are discussing again and again. Like, and again, we can take it for both EPDs and overall emissions. Like for overall emissions, you might normalize it to, let's say, a dollar revenue or something like that, and then you get like
Hmm.
an emissions intensity factor. And
Yeah.
for EPDs, you have it already calculated on a volume number, right? Like let's say kilogram or tons or
Yeah.
whatever volume is appropriate for that
Hmm.
product. But comparability, if we have two suppliers and one has a much lower footprint than the other supplier, can you trust that it actually means that they're more emissions friendly? Or is it such a mess today with all of the assumptions coming into it that it's more like you can't trust it? It's good to get them calculating it, but it's really hard to say this one is more environmentally friendly or emissions friendly than the other one.
Hmm. Well, if we go back to EPDs, if the
Mhm.
EPDs belong to the same program operator, the buyer should have certain. I mean, he can. This is my opinion. He can rely on those numbers. If
Mhm.
But of course, there are little nuances in there.
Yeah.
What they should be doing, the buyer, is read the EPD truly. You cannot just go and compare numbers. You need to read how the LCA calculations was done, what was included, what was not included, what were the main assumptions included in those numbers. Because even when the products are the same, the declared unit is the same, which is this volume. Usually, EPDs tell you the results are presented per ton of product or per
Mhm.
square meter or something like this. And even if the units are the same, even if the program operator are the same, the buyer should take the time to read the EPDs to see what is there, because
Do you think that's
it's not.
realistic, Fabian? Because so I get that, right? And I just said I spent a few hours, I think last week, looking at a bunch of EPDs for electronic products because we
Mhm.
have a customer that wanted to dive a lot deeper into that than we currently do. And like the same EPD, same format, same supplier, I couldn't create a data model where I could standardize it because there would be so many different things in it. And I'm just like,
Yeah.
this is all I do, and I'm struggling with it. Like, can you
Mhm.
realistically expect a buyer to dive into those assumptions?
You put me in a hard spot here. No, I mean honestly, if you are a building constructor and you have
Mm,
probably 300 suppliers or even more, that is not going to be realistic.
mhm.
Uh, but here is the thing: no one said that transitioning to a sustainable society was going to be easier. Yeah. No one, at least I have never seen someone promising that this is super easy and we are going to do it in 2 days and it's not going to take time and effort. It
Mhm.
takes time and effort. Yeah.
Yeah.
I know that. No, I don't think it's easy. In many cases, it's not realistic. If you are a small company and you only have three suppliers and two of them bring their EPDs, then it's easy.
Yeah.
If you are a large company and you have 300, 3,000 suppliers from which you have to choose one of them only, then most likely it is not going to be realistic and you will just take the numbers if, first of all, if you are actually using the EPD for decision making. Because in many cases, what is happening with LCA data is that it's required just to check.
Mhm.
I just need the document to be able to participate in the bidding process.
Yeah.
But then maybe the number is not even considered. It depends on many things. For example, in some countries like Denmark or in Canada or in Sweden, also in France and in the United States, there are new regulations setting caps or limits on the carbon footprint per certain amount of square meters constructed.
Mhm.
And then in those cases, carbon plays a big role. And most likely, these building constructors are going to start paying attention to those numbers, not only to the supplier bringing the document, but also to the number itself.
Got it. Yeah, because they have like a total allocation of emissions per square
Exactly.
meter, and yeah, okay, that makes sense. Yeah, and my job is basically to take all of that different information on product and supplier levels and turn it into something that's roughly comparable, like a score
Hmm.
that you can then base decision making on. So we see that struggle every day, and I think maybe as you're saying, the solution here is really to approach it a little bit like an onion, like saying, hey, for all of our suppliers, we require a maturity on emissions. And you can define that maturity in different ways. Do you understand the product level emissions? do you understand your company level emissions? Have you set targets to reduce them? Do you have specific programs in place and stuff like that? So there's a bunch of different ways you can understand and sort of quantify or make maturity comparable. But then I guess at some point, we may not be able to go into that nuance. We may not be able to take then two suppliers with a similar level of maturity and then compare this one as being more emission friendly than that one, because the assumptions behind it may be so
Mhm.
detailed that actually we would need to deep dive on it to really, really compare.
Yeah. First of all, I do believe that we need to take this in a sectoral level. The
Mm-hmm.
reason why, and going back to EPDs, the reason why EPDs are so highly developed in the construction sector is because when you sum the carbon emissions from the building sector, the
Mm-hmm.
embodied carbon plus the operational carbon, they make up to almost 40% of global emissions. So we are 40% of all the carbon emissions are coming from creating, putting together new buildings and running those buildings, the heating
Mm-hmm.
for thermal comfort, electricity in those buildings, air conditioning, etc. All those things account for almost 40%. That is why, if you ask me, regulations regarding accurate data and LCA data in the construction sector should be enforced, because
Mm-hmm.
there is a big chunk, we will be able to measure properly a big chunk of those carbon emissions. Yeah? The energy sector should follow. The food sector, I believe, is also important. And then we already understand what type of products are driving higher environmental impacts in also other different categories, and we should focus on them. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Now there is also the maturity and the size of different companies, and here I like the approach of the for example, the European Commission when it comes to corporate sustainability reporting. Large companies should be enforced to do this first,
Mm-hmm.
and then slowly start push for SMEs to join with certain leverage for them, not to push them too much, because we know that collecting all this data, there is a lot of effort in sustainability and in reporting, and some companies will not be able to allocate the resources to do that as other companies might. So it's a matter of understanding where we should focus on, or what are those industries and companies that are going to drive most of the potential reductions.
Got it. Okay, that's interesting. So if you sit and you are a sustainability manager at a large corporation, then which of your procurement categories would you expect to see a higher maturity of kind of EPDs and LCA? You're telling me, for example, construction, if you're
Yeah.
sourcing those type of things, it's going to be more prevalent. Food is probably
Mhm.
going to be more prevalent. Maybe energy. Are there like other industries where you could say here, you could maybe expect a higher maturity than others?
Yeah. Yeah, the automobile sector, when it
Okay.
comes to car manufacturing, they are also highly invested in
Mhm.
in obtaining this type of data. I have also seen, okay, I already mentioned the construction sector, the food sector, energy sector. We see more and more life cycle assessment data for energy systems, for production of solar panels, for installation of wind turbines. We are seeing more of that LCA data coming forward. Recently, I also understood that there is more LCA data coming for um, hardware,
Mhm.
with all because there is probably a lot of emissions that are not being counted in manufacturing all the gadgets that we use. Um, we should also try to enforce fossil fuel companies to be more transparent with environmental data.
Mhm.
They are not making a huge effort on this. They are barely calculating scope 1 emissions, maybe scope 2, and that's it. There is a big chunk that has been left aside.
Mhm.
Um, which other sector I see coming? The chemical sector is vital, because a lot of the things we use every day, we are putting a lot of chemicals into it, and we, again, if we don't have LCA data or environmental data for that, then we don't know actually what's going on in that final product. So I
Mhm.
think those are the most relevant sectors. Maybe I'm missing some, but that's what comes to the top of my mind right now.
Awesome. Okay. Um, That's really interesting. Another point I want to discuss with you, and tell me if I'm wrong, but one of the points we had in that kind of a episode you quickly listened to and mentioned in the beginning is that we talked a lot about product design versus
Mhm.
procurement optimization. Basically, the logic in my head is that there's two ways you can reduce emissions in your supply chain. You can either say, hey, I want to source from more sustainable suppliers. So let's
Mhm.
say you want steel, then you find the steel manufacturer that's most mature on emissions and you work with them to reduce their emissions over time. There's another way, which is basically saying, okay, I want to redesign my products so they require, let's say, less steel, and I use
Mhm.
a product that has lower emissions overall. And for me, that's the case for LCA. Really understanding, what goes into my product and how can I pick better materials that are more effective. And that's why I think it applies so well in like construction, because you're building a huge, house or building,
Mhm.
and you need a ton of stuff in that building, and you can decide whether you're using wooden beams or recycled aluminum or green aluminum, and so on. And that will have a huge impact on it, and you're designing that building anyways, right?
Yeah.
But is there, like, when you're if you are saying there's no way around using aluminum, I need to use it, but now I want to work with my supplier to basically reduce their emissions for aluminum, how often do you see like targets being set on a product, or like using the LCA approach? Is that something that you're starting to see, or is it more
Yeah.
you just kind of calculate it, disclose it, and then that's it?
Yeah, the use of LCA data in general, and I usually like to think about this in this way. We have carrots and we have sticks, right?
Hmm.
So we usually have carrots whenever we push for LCA data or sustainability data. The carrot for the companies is to showcase their environmental commitment, to show
Hmm.
their customers, look, we are worried for the environment, we are pushing forward with new technologies, we are pushing forward with new designs in order to reduce environmental impact. And at the same time, the carrot there is that when you reduce, for example, carbon emissions, you make your product cheaper.
Hmm.
Why? At least in Europe. Why? Because in Europe, you have these carbon allowances and you have the ETS system. So the more you pollute, the more expensive or the more money you have to pay for each ton of CO2 emissions. And honestly, and I'm going to be raw honest here, shareholders are not paying those allowances from their pocket. They are
Hmm.
transferring that cost to the client. Yeah. And then that client has to pay for that. And the client, whatever the company it is, they are not going to pay those allowances from their pocket. They're going to manufacture their product and then they are going to transfer that cost to the end user. And it's us, the ones that are paying for those allowances. So
Hmm.
companies that manage to reduce carbon emissions are going to be saving money at the end of the day because they are going to be able to sell their products. At a better price and therefore and therefore having the ability to be more competitive in the market, right? So there are a lot of carrots for a company to invest in sustainability data, but there
Hmm.
are also the sticks, and this is where it comes to regulations. Regulations like CBAM, regulations that like the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, and one specific regulation that should be coming this year or next year, which is the Eco Design for Product Sustainability Directive, I think it is called. Uh, and in that directive, what we have is that the European Commission has identified certain industries that pollute the most, and not only at the level of global warming potential, but also at the level of human health, causing damage in human health, causing damage in ecosystem, water footprint, etc. They have identified those industries, and they, through this directive, they are pushing those industries to create more sustainable products. And here it
Hmm.
comes, and here enters LCA. Okay, you design better, you are using less materials, or maybe you identify a supplier that can deliver to you less impactful material. How
Hmm.
do you measure at the end, when you put all together, the impact of your product? Then you need LCA, you need life cycle assessment to measure if your eco design idea is actually delivering the benefit that you think it is delivering. And then you can change with different suppliers, different materials, energy efficiency. You can include energy efficiency factors in your LCA. And this is how you support the decision. That's why eco design goes hand in hand with life cycle assessment. Life cycle assessment is not the same as eco design, but it's a tool to actually support your decisions. Yeah. The it is already happening in the building sector, and it is starting to happen in the chemical sector. The chemical sector in Europe is they have their couple of own guidelines or standards for product accounting, carbon footprint accounting, or for LCA accounting, and they are trying to work hard on that. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, so here's where I'm struggling, Fabian, and help me with this one. So I absolutely agree that almost all products probably need to be redesigned with sustainability in mind. I think that's really important, but I think there's also a complexity to that where, as an organization, you may have hundreds of products, if not thousands of products, right? On the same time, as we discussed with Jan there in the other interview, it's going to take you like 2 to 4 years to redesign a product because there's so many implications. You might have a product that's already selling quite well, so you don't want to disrupt that too much. You don't want to cannibalize it and so on. So maybe you're introducing like a new product, but reality is that 90% of the volume for that category is still going to the old one and these kind of things. So there's so much like nuance with product redesign where it's like, yes, we absolutely need to get that done. But if I'm then thinking as a buyer and thinking, how can I have the most impact on my supply chain? Is it gonna be by pushing my suppliers to redesign their products? I probably should in a very prioritized way, but that might take a long time, and every customer will be pushing on different products. So we start fragmenting purchasing power into a lot of kind of pushes on very separate things. Isn't it more effective to just say, I don't care how you guys reduce. Your emissions are X today. I need them to be 50% of that, in 5 years. And you find out how to do it. Just like I don't care what your financials are. I just want you to be stable and profitable, right? Then I'm happy, right? And then the supplier can sit there and be like, okay, 80-20, where do we get the majority of our emissions from? How can we be super strong in reducing on that? And they can have like a very simple and focused strategy rather than having to sit with every one of their 200 products and trying to create like individual reduction strategies for each of those. Do you kind of see where I'm getting?
Yeah, but I think you are touching two different, or not different. They are, of course, they are related, but they do not necessarily impact the way on how to work with LCA. Yes, it's going to be hard for companies to redesign every single product. Last year, I was working with a company. They manufacture, just to give you an example, that is, I always think that is very, very good. They were manufacturing carbon black. Carbon black is a material that goes basically into every single thing that you see that is black, into your microphone, the tires in your cars. And nowadays, there is no real substitute for carbon black. And carbon black is quite carbon intensity because you burn it, but a lot of carbon goes into the atmosphere. That is why these companies are trying to invest in carbon capture and storage. And they are trying to build new plants to capture that carbon. There are also some technologies that allow to produce carbon black without emissions, but the amount, if we look at the global level, the amount of carbon black that is being produced from those technologies is tiny, right? So we still have this problem. And there is no technology in place to replace 99% of that carbon black. So those emissions are going to still be there. Those companies are working in trying to redesign their products. They already have some green products that are lower in the environmental footprint. But as you said before, that makes maybe 10% of the dent of the total sales. Yeah. But that does not mean that those companies, if we are jumping into the LCA topic, it does not mean that it's going to be very complex for them to calculate the environmental impact for each of the products. When you
Mm-hmm.
have a company or that is making a lot of products, and maybe it's an SME, or maybe it's a large company that does not have the resources to make a specific LCA for each of the products, there are some shortcuts there. Life
Mm-hmm.
cycle assessment, as I mentioned before, is flexible. So worst case scenario, you collect basically the same data that you need for scope 1, 2, and 3, and you use that data following the LCA methodology, and then you do something that is called allocation. You use the same data for one LCA model, and worst case scenario, you allocate those impacts into the different product following certain rules. Yeah. It's
Got
an
it.
approximation. It's
Mm-hmm.
not gonna be exact, but it's gonna give those companies at least a starting point, right? Usually what
Interesting.
these companies do, when you have these companies with 200, 300, or 1,000 products, they do that to start with, and then based in logic, or based on their own knowledge of their processes, they already know which are the products that most likely, or most likely are to be the most impactful. Then they do specific LCAs for those 5 or 10 products, and this is how you save, uh, let's say, time and money in LCA. You can of
Mm.
course pretend to do an LCA for all of them. Although nowadays there are ways to work with that, there are new LCA tools that allow you to somehow create LCA models faster.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah? This is where it enters things like lifecycle assessment automation, EPD automation. We have companies like cement producers or ready mix producers in the construction environment that they have hundreds of products, maybe even thousand. For
Mm-hmm.
them, is simply not affordable to do an LCA for each one of their products unless they have a tool in place to streamline that process. Tools that already exist, and then you have certain companies doing EPDs for 100 euros a piece, which is
Mm-hmm.
quite cheap compared to a normal LCA that can cost 10,000 euros.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. So I didn't know the first point that you said there, that you can actually allocate your overall company level emissions into the individual products you're selling. What do you use there typically as an allocation key?
Yeah, there are 3 ways to allocate. Yeah, it's not First of all, let me make this clarification, because some LCA practitioners are gonna kill me for maybe for jumping into this allocation topic so easily. It is not recommended. It should be avoided at all, or try to be avoided at all costs to do
Mm-hmm.
allocation. Yeah, the recommendation is always to try to calculate for each product. But when it is not possible, you can do that allocation based on 3 things: on the production volumes. So if I am producing 3 products, 30% of my total production goes into this, 40% into other, and another 30 into other. Then I split the environmental impact in the same way: 30,
Mm-hmm.
40, and 30. Yeah, this is the so-called mass or physical allocation. There
Mm-hmm.
is another way to allocate impacts, which is by economics. If I have a product that only represents 20% of my total production volume, but it brings 80% of my revenue, then it kind of makes sense that I allocate most of the environmental impact to that product, even if it is only 20% of my production, because at the end, I'm running the plant thanks to that product. So that is the so called economic allocation. And when it comes to energy systems, we have the energy allocation. I allocate the environmental impact if I have multiple products based on the energy content of each of my
Mm.
products, right? So there are some rules on when and how to do this, but it is possible to do so.
That's interesting. And it's funny the kind of the the remark you made there to other LCA practitioners, because I think,
Yeah.
like, to me, science helped us get to this point where we know climate change is without a doubt happening. We need to address it and do something about it. It's been absolutely pivotal in that role. But in my kind of personal opinion, I feel like we've ended up in a point where it's so science driven
Mhm.
that we get so stuck in the detail. And I think what we need right now, and I'm super biased for saying this because I'm one of them, but we need entrepreneurs who are super 80/20 and just want to see results, right? Like we need a lot of ways to just take quick, easy in quotation marks, action to reduce emissions and just bring the overall number down, down, down.
Mhm.
And if we get stuck in this kind of mode where we're like, no, but this is not accurate enough. We actually don't know. You need to be deeper, deeper, deeper. We
Mhm.
spend so much time calculating that we're not creating results. And I have an example here from my days in consulting when I was still quite junior, where I still remember my mentor telling me, Thomas, you can keep spending time on this economic model that you're building, but what I need to know is just enough to make a decision on whether we go with A or B. And the model is still going to be incorrect, and your assumptions are going to be like, we need 10 times more details. And that would be me coming out of business school being like,
Mhm.
I want to get deeper, deeper, deeper. But what they just needed was enough information to make a decision. And then every other nuance beyond that was too much. And I think we
Yeah.
need to apply that logic sometimes in environmental design and sustainability, so we can take action and we can try something and make progress. And then we can go back and nitty gritty and fiddle with the nuances. And we absolutely need that for very polluting products like the one you mentioned, black carbon, and so on.
Mhm.
So that's like my personal pet peeve.
No, I mean, I agree. I agree with you. From a high level, we need to speed up those decision-making processes, right? We need to try to make it easier for as many people and as many companies as possible. And again, this is why I believe that at least when it comes to sustainability data and LCA data, LCA automation and EPD automation has an important role
Mhm.
to play there, because then you give a tool, you give to the company a tool where they actually, there are some tools to make EPDs where you don't have to know anything about LCA. You just
Mhm.
put the recipe of your product and then you have the results. This is what we need in place. But in order to put together those tools, you need that people that sits behind curtains and build these things for you. And that
Mhm.
people needs the deep knowledge and the
Mhm.
scientific knowledge, because at the end, a lot of this data is scientifically driven, right?
Mhm.
But of course, LCA is time consuming. It costs money, uh, at least upfront money if we think about tools. Uh, so we need to find a balance. Yeah, we need to have data fast enough and accurate enough to make the decision without get lost into rabbit holes.
Mhm.
Uh, but we always risk that using this type of data that might be not so accurate could lead to the wrong decision, right? So
Yeah.
it is, and here is where it becomes important that you have someone knowledgeable on your product and also in sustainability to understand that are those assumptions, is that data good enough for us to make the decision, yes or not? If I am an expert on certain technology and I realize that I conducted my study evaluating the main things that I already know bring most of the impact, then I can say, yes, this is good enough. Yeah.
Mhm.
But if I don't have any expert able to tell me that, then how do I know that that is enough? Yeah. You see where I think you see where I'm going. So I
Mhm.
fully agree with you. But we always need to rely on that people who knows how things are done.
100%. And it's really about the combination, right? Knowing when to be pragmatic and when
Mhm.
to dive really deep into the
Yeah.
nuances to get the most accurate picture so you can improve that.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm correct. I fully agree with you.
Super interesting, Fabian. I'm just looking at time here because there's so many things I want to discuss with you, Fabian. Maybe one last point here before we need to
Hmm.
wrap up. So we've talked a lot about emissions and the kind of the emission footprint part of an LCA lifecycle analysis and environmental product declaration, EPD. You also mentioned that sometimes these comments on other topics like waste or water consumption and stuff like that. Can you walk me through a little bit, when that happens and how to potentially use that for decision making?
Yeah, there are some cases where waste production and water footprint is I would say even more relevant than carbon footprint. If you are conducting an activity, whatever your activity is, a service or manufacturing a product, in an, let's say, in a region that you already know is water depleted, then you want to pay special attention to your water footprint, right? And this is the power of life cycle assessment. On the contrary to GSG protocol or other GSG guidelines, life cycle assessment allows you to identify the environmental impact in many other categories, right? The same with waste. If you are producing a hazardous waste, then you want to calculate how much of that are you producing, or how much of radioactive waste, how much of bulk waste. And then you need to understand what is the potential impact of disposing of those waste. And that leads to circularity topics. LCA and a lot of LCA practitioners and organizations are working into including LCI indicators, circularity indicator or circularity KPIs into life cycle assessment for manufacturers to showcase what are the potential circularity benefits of their products. And I think it's something that is gaining more momentum and is becoming more important, since we all understand and see that there is a untapped potential towards sustainability in circular behaviors. Not only, I don't like the word circular economy. It's a circular behavior, because it's not about the economy only. It's also about what we do at home. How do I reuse, recycle the things at home in my daily life, right?
And is it okay? So I think a lot of people like myself have probably made life cycle analysis synonymous with emissions data. So is it always in a life cycle analysis that I can find, other environmental topics in there like water and so on? Or is it only in some cases? Like, how is the industry dealing with this? Is there like a standard? It always needs to include these different topics? Or does it happen that it's mainly about calculating a footprint number?
As I mentioned at the beginning, there are several different frameworks or guidelines or standards on how to do LCA. Some of those standards are very specific on what are those impact categories you need to include, and some are not. Right? So at the end, everything goes up to the standard you are following. In the European Union, we have a specific LCA standard or methodology called the environmental footprint and product environmental footprint. And for example, in that framework, the European Commission set 16 different environmental impact categories from global warming potential, water footprint, some covering human health, some covering damage to ecosystems, some covering even biodiversity, use of energy, stuff like that. So at the end, everything goes down to the standard, and that's why I believe that we need not only the carrots but also the sticks. Yeah, we need someone to tell us what we should do in order to approach sustainability from a holistic perspective. Yeah, and empower. At the end, the way I see it, at the end, what we want is to empower citizens, to empower ourselves into making better choices. If I have data, if I can easily access data about the environmental impact of a product, then I can make better choices. If I am interested, of course, in the environment and in sustainability.
Awesome, Fabian. This has been absolutely amazing. If you want to leave listeners with one last thing on how to get started. So let's say that you are a sustainability or procurement professional. You're thinking about engaging your suppliers and asking for LCA data, and or you are getting LCA data from your suppliers and you're thinking about what to do with that. Is there any kind of last words you want to leave them with on how to get started and pitfalls to avoid?
Yeah, sure. I could tell you LCA. Look, I have been working with LCA for 7 years, and I am still learning a lot. I don't know everything, so it's a long path to follow, but it's very rewarding. I have managed to meet amazing people. I work in what I like. Uh, don't feel discouraged by lack of data, or don't feel discouraged by complex processes. I have found out in the last 2 years that the LCA community is very helpful. If you contact people will be happy to help, happy to provide some advices for free. In general, I think the sustainability environment is quite collaborative. At least is what I have found out.
Mm-hmm.
So now, if people wants to learn LCA, probably 5 years ago it was hard and you needed to pay. Nowadays there are a lot of LCA for free courses with certain decent level, quality level, I would say. Yeah. And at the end, most of the LCA guidelines are for free. The European Commission, the Joint Research Center has, I don't know, it's like 8 different guidelines on LCA. Each one of them is like 100 pages or something like that. The ILCD textbooks, they are for free. And honestly, it contains almost everything you need to know for life cycle assessment. You just need the time to learn, right?
Is it painful to read like most EU regulatory notes, or is it?
It's not. It's actually not a regulatory or a directive. It's very focused on. It's very hands-on. It's very practical. You need certain background, or at least some knowledge on. I would say not scientific knowledge, but some maybe engineering knowledge. I don't know how to call it, but it's very technical. Let's leave it like that. It's very technical, but everything you need to know is there.
Awesome. We'll link to that in the show notes.
Okay.
Fabian, thank you so much for coming on Next Frontier. It was really a pleasure having this discussion with you.
No, I really appreciate the invitation, Thomas. I must say this is the first podcast I participate. I was a little bit nervous, but the time just flew, right? I had a blast.
It was amazing. Fabian, Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, Thomas, for the invitation again, and have a great rest of the week.
Thanks, you too. If you're still here, then first of all, thank you so much for listening. If you've got thoughts about this episode or what you'd like to hear more of, you can email us at thomas@nextfrontier.earth. We really do read every email. You can also hit me up directly on LinkedIn. Just search for Thomas Buch Andersen. That's Thomas Buch Andersen. If you feel like it, please share with your friends and subscribe wherever you listen to our podcast. We also have a YouTube channel. It's on @NextFrontierEarth if you want to see what we actually look like in person. And if you really love the show, hit us with that 5-star review. Today's episode was produced and edited by Christina Sotu, and Next Frontier music is by Keyhole. See you next time.